Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be doing a box selection for multiple unit selection that maps to the terrain like you can see here. Now I just want to start with a disclaimer straight away. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. This is just how you do something that maps to the terrain like this. You can use this same code but like display the visual of the box selection with just a HUD on screen, like on the viewport display. But if you're interested in something that maps to the terrain like this, let's get started. If you haven't already been following along the RTS tutorials I've got on my channel, this is a continuation. So some of the code you're going to see here is in other videos, and I'll link to those up the top right whenever that may be the case. And we're definitely starting from a point where we can do individual selections. So the last video I did was on individual selection, so you can click and highlight and select individual units. So starting in the editor, we're going to set up our mouse input first. So we're going to come to our project settings input. We're actually going to have two inputs for our left mouse, and we've already got a left mouse click here, but what we want to add is a left mouse axis, and this will control the hold. Just like that. And the next thing we're going to need is a custom collision channel. Not exactly needed, but it makes things easier. So we're going to do a new trace channel is what we need, not a collision channel, but it's used for, you set it up through the collision. So we're just going to call this one terrain. You can call it whatever you like and put the default to ignore. What this does, the default is everything is going to inherit this channel, and by default we want everything to ignore it, and then we'll go in and then we'll set our terrain to block this. So that will be the next thing to do. Once you've added that, we'll go to our terrain. Depending on what terrain you're using, like if you're using world partition, you might have all these different terrains. So you actually need to change all of these. So it's each segment of the terrain. Or you may just have a landscape and you can change it on that. So for here, we want to go, for all these, we want to go to collision. Oops. In the details, we want to go to collision. And then for the preset, it's currently set to block all, and you can see by default, the terrain is set. So block all actually has set the terrain to block. But anything else that inherits the terrain, like if we go to one of these characters and go to their collision, you can see terrain is default to ignore. So and that's what we want. Now you can either leave that on block all or set it to custom, and just if you do, just make sure that terrain is set to block. So now we can create our first class. So in here, I'm going to create a new actor class, and this will be our selection box. So I'm just going to call it that, selection box. So now in our C++, we want to start on our player pawn and making the changes that we need to add for the selection box. We've got our mouse input down the bottom here from before, but you can put this stuff anywhere. But I'm going to create a property for our left mouse button hold threshold, so we'll use to detect when the mouse is being held. This will be how long it says, oh, you're holding the mouse. While we're here, we're going to add a reference to our selection box class that we just created. So we need to include, we just need to have a class reference to that. So that's adding that class selection box. That'll be the class that we use to spawn the selection box, and then another reference will be the actual a reference to the selection box after we've spawned one. And we're going to need another property here for whether or not we're doing a selection box or not. And we're going to need the initial hit location of where that selection box is going to start. So we'll use that as the left mouse hit location. You can name that or whatever you like, but that's literally what it's going to be. So that's what I've called it. So now we probably want to set up the functions for our left mouse input. So the first one that's different to what we've already got is we're going to need I'm going to put it in between the left pressed and left released. We're going to need a left held. And that's got the input of the axis value because it's that axis binding we just set up in the editor. And the other one we're going to need is we're going to just need a function to create the selection box, which will spawn the class that we just created. So I'm just going to create the definitions for those. So let's put the binding in for that. So we're going to need a binding for the axes, left mouse axis, and that's going to go to the left input held. So now let's start configuring some of these, and we're going to start with left mouse pressed. So the first thing we want to do is just check that our player controller is valid, because we're going to need to call functions on the player controller. And when we click the mouse, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to clear our selection, because we'll be doing a new selection, so we'll just pass a null pointer to our handle selection on the player controller. And that new box select bool that we added, we just want to reset that to false because it's a new selection in case it was previously somehow set to true. And the other thing that we want to do here is we want to populate our left mouse hit location. Before we do that, we're actually going to handle the position through the player controller. So let's fire up our player controller here, and we're going to add some functions to the public area here. So we've got our handle selection there, and just underneath that, we're going to add get mouse position on terrain. And you'll see why I'm putting this in the player controller in a second. I'm just going to build that definition. So here we're going to do a line trace to the terrain from the mouse position and populate and pass back that position on the terrain. This is the reason why I'm doing this in here, because we either need to reference this function from the player controller or just call it in the player controller like this. So this is just going to get that world location and world direction from the mouse pointer to the world. And then we're going to need a hit reference for our line trace. And this is where we're going to use our custom trace channel. Getting a world reference we use to do the line trace. We're passing in our hit result. We're passing in the world direction, and we're calculating an end to the line trace by using the world direction and just a arbitrary distance. So it just needs to be enough distance to make it from your player camera to your terrain. And then to use that custom trace channel, this is how you use the custom trace channel. Make sure it's game, not engine, and that's custom trace channel 1. And if you ever have difficulties like trying to figure out which is trace channel 1 or what's 2, and if you're using multiple, you can go to your default engine.ini and you'll find the collision channels all in here. And you can see here, default channel response, game trace channel 1, name, terrain. And that's what we added. And that's under the collision profiles. We're basically saying if we hit something and it's a blocking, we're checking it, we have a blocking hit, and then we're returning that location of that hit, which will be our terrain, because nothing else should be on this trace channel. So it shouldn't hit any, like if you've got trees or anything like that, just make sure they're set to ignore on that custom trace channel, and it will just hit the terrain. We know it's terrain. We don't hit anything, we're going to pass back a 0 vector. So now back in our player pawn, we can set our left mouse hit location to that location. So that's either going to be a hit on the terrain, or it's going to be a 0 vector if we hit nothing. Shouldn't ever really be the case. All right, for the next one, for the input held, we're going to do the same check again, the safety check. Got a player controller reference. We don't want to do anything if the axis value is doing nothing, as in we're not holding the mouse button. To use this, the left mouse hold threshold, we basically want to say, okay, how long have we been holding the mouse, and do we want to activate the hold code yet? So we're checking that the key for left mouse button, how long it's been held, and is that greater to or equal than the left mouse hold threshold. So this isn't just a number I've put in that I've found it works all right. So you can play with that. You might want it less, you might want it longer. Depends on what else you're doing with other keys and things like that. This will do for our demonstration here. The next part is we're going to check that we're not already doing a box select. So this is going to run every tick. So like we don't want to call this over and over and over. This is just to initialize the fact that we're holding the mouse button down. We're going to handle holding the mouse button down in the selection box. We're going to make sure we do have a reference to a selection box and we've spawned one, and then we're going to call a start function on that, which we haven't set up yet, but we will. So I'm going to include the selection box.h at the top. That's our reference. And obviously there's no start function there, but there will be. And we're also setting this box selection to true on the first tick. So when we come through the next time that we're still holding the mouse, it will not run this code again because we're results at false. All right, we'll come back to the selection box. We're just going to update our mouse left release here. So we're checking we've got a player controller reference, and now we need to add our handling of box selection in here. Check that we're doing a box select and the box selection is valid like before. And this normal selection will go into the, if we're not doing a box select, that's where we'll do our normal selection. And then here we're just going to say, okay, we've finished a box select, so we're going to tell our box select object to end the box selection, and we're going to set our box selection to false, which we'll complete in a second. So before we go on to the selection box, I just want to come back to the player controller. We're going to add an override here for our handle selection that handles taking a group rather than an individual unit. And we also want to add a server select group function here. So the handle selection, we'll call that server select group. And in here we're going to do similar to our normal select here. We're just going to have it so it can handle a group. So we're going to clear the selection, iterate through the group of actors, and add them to the selected, and call the select on each one. And because we're iterating over this group and we're checking to see if they're selectable, we're actually going to add them to this second array because we can't modify this array. So if we come across a unit that's not selectable, we can't remove it from this array because we're iterating over it. So what we're going to do is we're going to check who's valid. We can call the select here, but we're going to add them to a valid actors array for selection, and then once we've finished checking them all, then we'll go ahead and actually add them to the selected array and call the onReplicated selected. This way that we're only adding to this array once, and we're only calling the onRep once, so we're not calling it for each unit that's added to the array. And then we'll just reset that valid actors array for the next time. Make sure there's no leftover units in there. So now we can do our selection box. So I'm going to open up the new selection box class that we created at the start in the CPP. So obviously we need the start and end because that's what we were calling from the player to get the start box beginning. So we'll set these up first. We are going to need some properties though, like some variables to control that. I'm going to move this tick up to here. Get rid of that second public. Actually, I'll make that we'll have some private stuff here, so make that private. So we're going to have a box collider component on the box, on the selection box. I'm going to add that reference. And we're also going to need a decal component because that's what controls the visual of the selection box. And we'll have a boolean, which is our box select, whether it's active or not, and a reference back to our player controller. There is going to be some other properties we're going to need. So we're going to need some properties for our actual box control, like the size and shape and stuff. So we're going to need a start location, start rotation. This is an array to store what characters are in the box, and this is an array to store what characters centers are in the box. And I'll go through that more. It's sort of like an optional thing, but it allows for a bit finer tuning on who's selected, who's not. We're going to need a few other functions too. So we're going to need an adjust, I'm calling it. This is what will change the size of the box when you're dragging along. And then we're going to need to manage the units that are inside it. You could name these whatever you like, whatever you think best describes it. I'm going to call this one handle highlight, which will handle the highlighting of the units inside. And this one is the next one's an override. We need to override the box collider begin overlap. So it's quite a long name, but if you can look this up by looking up the signature for the delegate. But that's all there if you just want to copy it out, or I'll show you how to find the delegate once we do the box collider. So I'm just going to implement those functions. So we'll start at the constructor. We just want to add our box collider. And we'll add the .h file for the box component. Our box collider, we just want to set some default settings. So we want to set the box extent just to a small size, so like it's not selecting something when it's not active or anything like that. It only needs to be query only on the collision, and we can put the response channel just to overlap, and that'll be for pawns. So we can do it like that. And we'll make the box collider the root component. So the other thing we wanted to add was the decal, and we're just going to create the decal, add that to the as a child of the root component, like that. And we've got the boolean. We want to just set a default for that, which is the box select. And the other thing we wanted to do was have the begin overlap. This is where we need to set the delegate for it. Actually, I'll put that up underneath the box collider. This is built into an actor class, so you can handle overlap events. So on this box collider, on its component begin overlap, we're adding a call to that function. And the reason why that function has to have all those variables is because the signature of this function has those variables. If we follow this back to the primitive component here, and we follow this back, this is the signature of the delegate. So you can just copy that and take out the commas between the variables and stick that in the function if you're doing it manually. But that's how you find the signature that you need, and it starts from here. So each time we get an overlap, that function will be called. Right, in our begin play now, we want to show my. I'll bring this up here, just above all the functions. We'll disable collision, not enable. We'll enable it in the start, but we'll disable the collision. So when if the box collider, box selection is just spawned and sitting there, it won't interact with anything. And then if we've got a decal component, we want to just set that as non-visible, so we don't have a box select visible in the game when it's just sitting there doing nothing. And we just want to assign a reference to our player controller. I'm just going to do that like that. I might do the tick. This tick, I'm going to bring that up as well. Put that under here. So in tick, this is where we'll call our managing and basically whatever it will run while we're dragging a box select. So we want to check that box select is true, and we're going to call that adjust function to adjust the size and manage. So when we press the mouse button and we hold it for a certain amount of time, we need to start this box selection off. So first of all, we want to check that we've got a decal component and it's valid. If not, don't do anything. And then we're passing in our position and rotation here, so we just want to initialize those values. So I'm gonna take out the height of the position and have it this will ensure that you get the lowest point. So if you select on a hill, you actually want to go from the lowest point, which should be 0. Otherwise, the selection box collider will be above the hill, and anything that's on the slope of the hill you won't select. So we're taking out height for this start location, so it'll be under the ground. It'll make sense later. And the start rotation is, we only need a yaw for that. We don't want to tilt and do all crazy stuff. The next thing we want to do is actually set the box collider to where we're clicking and set its rotation to our current rotation that we're passing in, and enable the collision so we can start getting the overlap events. And then we'll just set up our parameters here. So we're clearing the arrays, making sure they're empty, setting the visibility of the decal to on, and setting our bool, which manages our tick, to true. So that'll start the tick at that point. I'll put that at the bottom. We've done our selection. We're managing and adjusting the selection, but at the end, we need to send back the selection. So we're going to be going to the player controller. So we want to see that we have a valid player controller reference. We want to stop the tick so we don't get any updates while we're going to use these things. And we're basically doing the reverse of the start here. So we're going to disable the collision, set visibility to false, because we've let go of the mouse button at this point. And now we want to handle our selection. As I said before, we've got the two arrays. We've got the center inbox and we've just got inbox. And I will explain that more, but basically the center inbox is the one that we're going to select. So we're going to send that group to the handle selection group function that we called before. So with that override that we did, we can just call handle selection. We can either pass a unit or a group, and in this case, we're passing an array. If there's no one in the box, then we want to clear the selection, so we're just passing a null pointer, which will clear all our selections. for tidy's sake, we're just going to clear those arrays because we're finished with them. Even though they get cleared on start again, we'll might as well clear them here just to be safe. For the highlight, we just want to make sure it's a selectable. So we're going to use our interface there that we're using to select the units, and then we're going to highlight them only. So we're not doing a full select like we do in our player controller, but we're just enabling the highlight. So this will show what's in the box and what's going to be highlighted when you release the mouse. For our collider, this is where we build our inbox list. So we just want to check that the other actor, which is the actor that's caused the overlap event, we just want to make sure that it's valid and it's not this actual actor itself. We're not trying to select ourselves type thing, which is the box select actor. So then we call the selection interface to make sure whatever it is that we're just cause the overlap event is an actual selectable object, and then we add it to the inbox array. You can do, there is another function here, like implements, I think it is, dot implements. So you can go like other actor implements and put in the interface, but I found it a bit flaky to be honest, so I'll just do this. It's just a cast, a simple cast, so it's not a big deal. Alrighty, so back up to our adjust. We want to change the size of our box, and we obviously, like we always do first, we check that stuff's valid so we don't get any crashes. Checking that our player controller reference is valid. Checking our box, we've got a box collider and a decal component. So the first thing we're going to need is the current mouse position on the terrain. And we've got that function already in our player controller. That's why we're using our player controller reference here. And then we need to know our current endpoint. And then from that current mouse position, we're going to take out the height like we were talking about before. We want to remove the height from that. So this will be our endpoint. We've saved the start point when we started. I think we passed that in, didn't we? Yep. So the start location's there without any height. And now we're doing the current mouse position. So this is adjusting on tick, remember? And the endpoint is going to be where the other side of the box is. And we want to take out the height on that. So we're using the current position on the terrain, and we're going straight down to 0 at that position, X and Y. And now we need to, because the box collider, it actually resizes from the center. So what we need to do is position our box collider in the center of that selection. So if we're drawing this, what we're doing is we're getting a start point and an end point, and then with this first one, we're calculating a center point. So as we move, actually we're going this way, aren't we? As we move that along, this needs to resize out all directions. Like that from the center. So if we can't just sit it here and resize it because our box select will be up like this. We want it to be the top left corner there, the bottom right corner there, like that. So that lerp is basically finding halfway between those 2 points with that artwork. Amazing. So now we need to set the box collider's extent to that, where we're at in that change of position. So this is calculating the extent of that box by subtracting the vector from the current location. And then for the rotation, so we've already set the actor's rotation, and we're just getting the local rotation now and factoring that into the box extent. So the X and Y's will be shifted in the direction that our rotation is. So you won't always have like a straight X and Y world location box. Whichever way the camera's facing, your X and Y will be forward and back from that. It's probably worth showing that actually so if we didn't factor in that rotation, the box would always be that direction. Even when our camera's rotated, our box would still go that way. And it makes sense there, but on the angles it doesn't. When we factor in the rotation, it changes the box select, so whichever way we're facing, it's up and down towards the camera. So that's using the local rotation there. And we're just making sure that's a positive value, otherwise, by getting the absolute, otherwise your box select will only work one direction. And what we need to do for the extent is add a Z value that's really huge. So we're just adding to the height of the box, otherwise you won't overlap actors in hills and stuff. So if I show you when I drag a box, you can see the box is massive. Or too massive, but it covers everything. You could check which is your max height of your train and put it a bit above that. But that just means that, if we do a box over this hill, make sure no units is above the box and not inside and doesn't do the overlap event. And then we're setting that extent on the box collider. So the next thing we need to do to adjust is the actual decal. And we need to set the decal to the same as the box collider. Now the only thing with decals is they need to be rotated to be flat on the ground, because decals are set up default to work on like walls and bloodstains and bullet holes on walls and or posters or whatever. So we actually need to rotate the Y 90 degrees. Is it Y? Yeah, Y. So that messes with our X, Y, and Z. So Z becomes X and X becomes Z basically. So we actually do that rotation in local space. So like, if I take this cube let's stop that. If I take this cube for example, it's probably going to be a crap example because it's square, but if we go to local space and we rotate the 90 on the Y, so we're flipping it on its side, you can now see that Z is forward. I think I went more than 90, but and the X has become the Z up and down. That's all that it is. And you have to do that for a decal to project onto a vertical or a flat horizontal surface. If we're projecting onto a wall, then it'd be right. So that's it for our adjust function. That'll adjust everything that we need to adjust. And now we've got to manage the overlap or manage what we're selecting. So again, just want to make sure we've got a box collider component. It's all valid. Begin overlap event is adding to the inbox. So we just need to manage each tick will just manage what's in that inbox. Sounds like an email, doesn't it? But this is basically saying what is even touching the box, what is in it. We want to do is check that the actual center of the unit is in the box. And the reason for this is if you got like units doesn't really show up, but for bigger units like vehicles or something that's really big and you're trying to select multiple and you're touching just the corner of one, it's going to select it. Whereas if you make it only select if the center of the object is in the box, then you can do more accurate selection. So you know that like if I have to go right over that unit for it to be selected. So this is obviously personal preference. If you don't need that sort of thing, just select whatever's in the inbox. That's fine. Probably don't need all this calculation that we're about to do. I'm finding out where the actor's center is, and then this calculation is factoring in the rotation of that unit as well. Essentially all we're doing is checking to see if the extent of the box overlaps the center of the actor, just like we've been talking about. So if it does, we want to add it to our center inbox array. We want to handle the highlight of that unit if it's selectable. We want it to be highlighted because it's about to be selected if we let go of the mouse. And then if it's not, we just want to ensure if something's center was in the box and now it's not, then we want to remove it from this array and take the highlight off. So if you go over something with the highlight and then back off it, it'll de-highlight it and remove it from selection consideration. So now we can build this back up and go back into the editor, and we just need to assign a few of our variables such as the box selection class, our decal material, and we need to do that 90-degree rotation so the decal works, things like that, and then we should be good to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a blueprint class. I'll put it in, let's put in content. Where's our selection box? I'm going to create a blueprint class, content, it's going to call it b_selection box. You can see we've got our box collider, we've got our decal component, and we need to rotate this decal 90 degrees. So you can see the decal is meant to work that way on a wall, and we just need it to face the ground. We could do negative 92, I think it'll still work. It's just if it's inside this box, which direction is going to display. And now that is, actually no, we need to assign our decal material here. So if you haven't seen the decal material video, that's linked up to the top right. And we're going to use the instance for that. Now to test that that's working before we start testing it with code, I have to save this. We can just drag that into the world, and there you go, it's working. So now we need to assign that reference to our player, and we created the setting for that. I think it was settings, and then I had it under mouse. And if you're looking for the settings names, that is this here, settings mouse, or this one specifically. So we're just going to assign that to our B selection box. And just be aware that you could select this one, you don't even need this blueprint. Oh no, we do need a blueprint, sorry, for this because we need to assign the material. You can make this not show up here by just adding it as an abstract class. So if you go back to here into the box selection box, in the U class property, just add abstract here. And then that won't show up because if you actually accidentally choose that one in here, it won't work because it doesn't have the material assigned. And also it's not rotated. You could rotate it in code though. Probably could have done that. That should be good to go now. So let's give it a go. And of course it doesn't work. And I know why it doesn't work, because we haven't created the box selection. I've missed a step. I believe that will be in the begin play of our player. We need to call the function that I think we created, but we never create selection box. So when the game starts, this will create the actual box that we can then manipulate. And we didn't even do the code. So we just want to make sure that we have that class. If we don't, return out of there. Because we don't know it crashes. We need a world reference because we're going to spawn an actor. So let's check if we've got one of those. We're just doing a standard spawn actor and assigning it to that selection box parameter that we set up. I don't think there's anything crazy there. We don't really care where we're spawning it and what rotation it is because we're going to set that when we need it. Constructor of this the constructor of the selection box turns it off, so it's not going to affect anything. I will just, even though we're saying this is the owner, I find sometimes this doesn't do anything. So I'm just going to set the owner to this, just to make sure it's got an owner. I don't think we're actually using like get owner, but it's just a habit I have of doing that. Now we should be right. So we need to rebuild. Right, after a little bit of debugging there, I found that before when we looked at the terrains, let's highlight them all again, because we're going to need to change it. It mustn't have refreshed the collider yet, so you actually do need to set it to custom, not block all, because you can see there it's updated now. Terrain is coming through as its default ignore, which is what we want for everything else except for the terrain. So we're just going to set this to custom. So it keeps the same settings as what we just had, but we just want to change terrain to block. And then we'll save everything. We should be in business. And there we go. So we can deselect. And then when we let go, they stay selected. Selection box, they'll deselect. Like so. You can see this is where you got to adjust your hold threshold. So you sort of got to press and hold for a bit before it happens. I can't just drag, but I've got it so it remembers. If you do drag really fast and hold the mouse, it remembers where the original location is. So if you set the start location in the hold function, it will actually, if you press and then start dragging and it doesn't kick in till you're here, it'll actually start from there. Whereas if you store the original location where you just pressed, then by the time you get down to here, it'll start the box, but it will start from back where you originally pressed. So it sort of hides the delay a bit. If you just hold the mouse, it'll drag right out. I hope that makes sense. So you can see these guys are at different heights, and they'll still get selected. We've got our cool little bend and lining over the terrain. Hope someone out there finds this useful. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.